Alright guys, this video we're going to be going over some things that I don't like about the 2010 V6 Camaro. So this video, I love this car. This car is awesome. But this video is probably going to be pretty long because there's a lot of little things about this car that bug me. And that's what this video is going to be about. So we'll step inside and we'll go with my biggest gripe of this whole car, which is the Aisin AY6 transmission. Now, climb in here. Now the throttle response, it's pretty decent. Not my favorite throttle response. You know, it is an electric throttle. Not a huge fan of those. It's calibrated okay. Could be better. Brakes, have no complaints, but the clutch pedal, it's very light, very easy. But the problem I have with this clutch pedal is that there's not a whole lot of feel, and it just, shifting gears, there's a lot of rev hang between first and second especially. So it took me a long time to be able to shift this thing somewhat quickly. Another thing I don't like is the shifter, it feels okay. It's a little rubbery feeling. It's not super solid like a T56 is, but it goes into all the gears all right. It's not hard by any means. So the actual shifting of the transmission isn't bad. But the clutch is very, very awkward for me. I'm sure for other people, if this is the only manual car you've ever driven, I'm sure you would get used to it just fine. But I switch around between a lot of manual cars, and this one always takes me like a good while to get used to again after driving something else. So the clutch, I'm not a huge fan of. The ratios in the AY6, I think are completely wrong. I think first, second, third, and fourth are just the absolute wrong ratios for this car. First is extremely short, which would be fine, but the difference between first and second is just too big, because you cannot shift from first to second quickly in this car. Either you're doing first to second really hard and you're like banging the gear in a second, you're chirping the tires, which I think is really bad for the car. So you can never really go first to second fast. Second to third, same kind of thing. It's a weird ratio, a weird gap, because you go second to third, and their engine speed doesn't come down fast enough, so it's just really, really awkward. And then you'll be in fourth, cruising around town, and you want to go to fifth, but you'll be at like, you know, 1800 RPM, and you want to go into fifth, and you'll be at like 1000 RPM, but the engine speed will just drop really, really fast. So it's like completely different than when you're in lower gears and the engine speed hangs and it doesn't fall fast enough. So the whole gearing and the engine rev hang and the weird clutch feel, it just makes for a really awkward experience to get used to. Once you're used to it, it's really not bad, but it took me a long time to get used to this car. Another thing I don't like about it is this 3.6 engine. It actually runs so smooth and so quiet that it's very difficult for me to drive, because I'll be sitting in traffic and you'll have the radio on or the air conditioning on, so you have some noise, and you'll go into first at a stoplight and you go to take off and you'll realize that you had already stalled the car like 5 minutes earlier, because the engine is so smooth and so quiet, it's actually hard for me to tell when or not it's running. So I find myself looking at the tachometer a lot, which is unusual for me. Usually I never look at the tachometer. So that is another thing I don't like about it, is just the engine is so smooth and so quiet that it's difficult for me to tell when or not it's running. The gearing is probably my biggest complaint. The clutch and the gearing. Very awkward. It is not set up for performance driving. Which, I mean, it's a Camaro, right? You want to be able to drive it, you know, kind of spiritedly, but it just doesn't work like that. I'm really glad that GM went with the Tremec 6-speed on the new V6 Camaros. I think that was a good move. This Aisin unit, a lot of people have a lot of problems with these. This one doesn't have any problems. It's got 110,000 miles on it on the original clutch. So it's been, you know, for this particular car, it's been very reliable, but the overall experience of driving it is just not like you're going to get with a Tremec. So that's kind of disappointing. But overall interior, I don't have any complaints there. You'll see in my video things I love about this car. I go over the interior and why I really like everything about it. But the one thing I will complain about is the back seat space. No, I get it. It's a Camaro. It's not about, you know, family practicality, but look at that back seat. There is not a whole lot of space there. Now, I have put my friends back there a couple times in a pinch, but it's not ideal. You can really not fit any real person back there regularly. It just doesn't work. So I'll talk about the visibility. That's a big thing with 5th gens. Everybody complains about it. I don't think it's that big of a deal. Everybody whines about it. I think people just like to make things up. Oh, this car sucks because the visibility's bad. It's really not bad, okay? You sit in the car like a normal driver, see out the front just fine. You can see the big cowl on the hood. That's pretty awesome. You have decent side visibility. Yeah, your blind spots are a little bit bigger than the average car, but it's really not that bad. You look in the rear view mirror, you can see out the back of the car just fine. So if anybody's complaining about the visibility of this car, they just want to make things up on what to complain about. Now we will talk about the engine here. Now I talked about the engine in the video about things I love about this car. And that is true, I do love this engine. It functions very, very well. The engine, it's got 110,000 miles on it. It runs great. I apologize for that slight interruption in the video there. Somebody came up to the parking lot, like parked right next to me. I'm in this huge empty parking lot and they parked right next to me. It was very awkward. But anyway, things I don't like about this engine. Now it makes 304 horsepower, which is pretty good. Very good actually for a naturally aspirated engine. It makes 278 pound-feet of torque, which is a fairly impressive figure. The only problem I have with that is that it makes those figures very, very high up. This engine redlines at, I believe, 7,400 RPM, which is very, very high. The problem is in normal driving situations, you are never going to get to 7,400 RPM, such as merging out onto the normal main road out of your neighborhood. You don't want to be going at 7,400 RPM all the time. You want to be able to go, you know, shift at 2,000 or 3,000 RPM and have a decent amount of power, but in this engine, that's just not possible. You really have to rev this thing out to get it moving, which maybe it's not so bad if that's all you ever knew, but when you're used to torqueier engines like a 3800 or an LS1, this engine takes a while to get used to. Like I said before, it runs so smoothly that it's actually difficult to drive with a manual. I'm sure with an automatic you have no problem, but with a manual, this engine is kind of tricky. Lack of low-end torque, it is kind of annoying. I suppose if you just got used to it, it would be alright, but it bothers me. Some other things I don't like about it. The trunk is actually, so I said in the video the things I like about this car, you have a good amount of space in there, which is true. But the things I don't like about it is the opening to the trunk is not very big. You can only fit like a very small box or bags in here. So like, if you have a box that's a decent size, it would physically fit in the trunk, but you cannot get it into the trunk because the opening to the trunk is so small. It's just a very awkward setup. So it makes this trunk, which is a good size for a sports car, it makes it kind of unusable because the opening to it is so small. Kind of annoying. Another thing I hate about this car. So you see here, there's no keyhole to access this trunk. Well, the problem is the battery is stored inside the spare tire. So you're thinking, okay, whatever, the battery dies, you open the trunk, you fish it out. Well, it's not quite that simple, because when the battery dies, you cannot get into the trunk. So what you have to do is you have to climb in through the back seat and access, or pull this cable and then access the battery. Very annoying. I've had to do it once on my uncle's car. Not any fun. So you think, okay, you put the battery in the trunk for weight distribution, that's all fine and dandy, but at some point you have to give up some kind of performance for practicality, and I definitely would have just put the battery in a more accessible spot, or simply put a keyhole in there. I think that would have been way easier and much more practical, but what do I know? Some other things I don't like about this car, I mean, that's really it. You have the engine's lack of torque, the engine's lack of feel, lack of sound, and then you have the very, very uncomfortable ratios in the Eisen AY6. Then you have this weird clutch that's, again, it functions, it's very reliable, it's got 110,000 miles on it, but it's just awkward. So yeah, that's what everything I don't like about this car is simply because it's just not what I'm used to. It's just not what I'm comfortable with. And I think a lot of people will agree with me. If you've driven more manual cars than just this one, you'll agree that these are really uncomfortable ratios. This clutch is not set up for performance driving. The engine needs some kind of more low-end torque, something. But yeah, so this, I'm sure this exact car with the new Tremec that they're putting in the 6th gens, I'm sure would feel fantastic compared to this one. But this Eisen's just not, it's not my cup of tea. But for the price that these 5th gens are going for, I mean, again, you can't really complain. This video is just about things that I personally don't like about this car. But yeah, so thanks for watching, guys.